You're listening to a Brooklyn Nets episode of the Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the team's latest goings-on as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Welcome to another Brooklyn Nets episode of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk. And it was kind of funny. After the regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show was posted this afternoon, people reached out to me. They said, why aren't you talking about any of the NBA stories? Drummond and Griffin and John Collins. I'm saving it for now. I'm saving it for this show. Because the Nets are at the center of it. It's been a while since the Nets have been so heavily linked to trade rumors. This season is the first time in a while. I mean, there used to be a time when the Nets were linked to all the big stars. Melo, Dwight Howard, etc., etc. And Nets fans spent countless hours on the NBA trade machine trying to craft trades that would work. Then the Pearson-Garnett trade happened. The Nets were terrible. There was no way that they could make blockbuster trades. The best you could hope for was a D'Angelo Russell sweetener to a Timofey Mozgov salary dump. But now that the Nets are good again and are title favorites, I don't care what anyone says, the Brooklyn Nets are title favorites. That's just fact. You see them linked heavily to guys like John Collins, Andre Drummond, Blake Griffin, and even J.J. Redick. I mean, it does take me back to those days that I would run home from school, go on the NBA trade machine, and try to figure out the nuances of the salary cap. And mind you, this was when I was in middle school. There are a lot of adults that don't understand the NBA salary cap. Imagine a 13-year-old trying to figure it out. Look, as much as I would love to trade for one of these guys, maybe even two, Redick and one of Collins, Drummond, and Griffin, it's probably not going to happen. See, it goes back to the James Harden trade. And this is something that no one thought of. I didn't think of this. None of the NBA pundits thought of this. I don't even know if Sean Marks thought of this. The cupboard of trade assets that the Nets have right now is barren. You have Spencer Dinwiddie and DeAndre Jordan. That's it. And you don't have any draft picks to add as sweeteners. You just have seconds. That's it. The Nets put all their eggs in the James Harden basket. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Okay, no one loved that trade more than me. I'm not saying it was a bad decision to trade for James Harden. Love James Harden. Want him on the Nets for the rest of his career. Him, Durant, and Kyrie. Let them all retire as Nets. But the simple fact is, it did leave the Nets with no flexibility to flesh out the rest of their roster. We were looking for guys like Reggie Perry and TLC to really step up. They didn't. So now the Nets have to look to steal a guy in a trade or wait until the buyout market, which is going to materialize in a month and 10 days. I mean, let's think about each of the four guys who the Nets have been linked to. John Collins, Andre Drummond, Blake Griffin, and J.J. Redick. How realistic is it for the Nets to get one of those four guys in a trade? I'll start with Collins. According to Shams Charania of The Athletic, the Hawks want a high lottery pick if they're going to trade Collins. So right there, the Nets are out. And it's not like they have some young lottery pick from a year or two ago that they can trade. So Collins probably isn't in the cards. Also, if I was the Hawks, I wouldn't trade John Collins. John Collins is 23 years old. He is their second leading scorer. What, you don't want to pay him when he hits restricted free agency? That's not a good reason to get rid of him. Then you know what? Trade Capella. You want to keep your payroll low? Trade Clint Capella. The guy's making $16 million this year. He's going to make $17 million the year after. He's older than Collins. You have Onyeka Okongwu. Trade Clint Capella. If you have to trade someone to keep payroll low, trade Capella. Don't trade Collins. I can't say I'd be stunned if Collins was traded, but it would make no sense. The guy who I really want out of that group of four is Andre Drummond. Drummond fits the Nets perfectly. This is a team that really doesn't have a lot of size. You want to tell me that's not as important as it once was? You're right, but it's still important. They have two true centers, DeAndre Jordan and Norvel Pelle. Now let me say that if DeAndre Jordan played like we all know he's capable of playing, we've seen him do it with the Clippers, it's not as big an issue. But my God, he can't defend these stretch fives. He's really not a great rebounder. I'm hesitant to say he's a bad rebounder because he's still putting up 7 rebounds per game. If you look at his per 36 stats, he's averaging 12 rebounds per game. But he's certainly not the rebounder he once was. And defensively, forget about it. You know, the biggest gripe that people had with the Harden trade was losing Jarrett Allen. I said, hey, you have a guy in DeAndre Jordan who's going to be able to protect the rim. You'll lose something by trading Allen, but you won't lose a whole hell of a lot. Jordan will be able to compensate. No, Jordan has failed. Can he still swat balls away? The answer is yes. He's averaging a block and a half per game. But there was a game not that long ago where James Harden and Steve Nash went off on Jordan for his terrible defense. And all due respect to Norvel Pell, not a bad player, but for a team that's looking to win an NBA championship, you don't want him being the backup center. Why do you think the Nets go small so much? I mean, against the Warriors the other day, Bruce Brown was playing the 5. Bruce Brown is 6'4". Now, I like Bruce Brown. Don't get me wrong. He's one of the best defenders the Nets have. But in a perfect world, he wouldn't be playing the 5. It worked because the Warriors like to go small. Realize they don't have James Wiseman right now. So yeah, you can get away with a crazy Bruce Brown at center lineup. But against a team like the Sixers, or the Pacers, or even the Knicks, that's not going to work. And it definitely won't work against the Jazz. Rudy Gobert would feast. Shout out to the Jazz, by the way. They're the best team in basketball and no one's talking about them. They've won 17 of their last 18 games. They are an incredible team. But in their one game against the Nets this year, they lost by 34. So when you boil it down to the ground, what does this team really need? They need a rebounder and a really good interior defender. That's Andre Drummond. That's what Drummond's done his whole career. Drummond this year is averaging 13.5 rebounds per game. Now that's incredible. But I'm going to say something scary to you. That's the lowest total of his career since his sophomore season. He's an underrated passer. He's not Jokic or anything, but he's not bad. And he would make the Nets' interior defense exponentially better. Is Drummond a great defender? The answer is no. He's not Miles Turner. But is he really, 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 really good? The answer is yes. He is a big improvement over DeAndre Jordan. I'm telling you, if you were to write down on a piece of paper what the Nets really need, it would look a lot like Andre Drummond. And it can happen. The Cavs want to get rid of Drummond sooner rather than later. A trade of Dinwiddie, Jordan, and Nick Claxton for Drummond works, according to the NBA trade machine. Would that be enough to convince the Cavs to trade him to the Nets? It depends on what other teams offer. It's better than just buying him out. But even then, how much does Dinwiddie fit the Cavaliers? Assuming Dinwiddie comes back next year, which isn't a guarantee because he's gonna opt out of his contract for next year and then sign a new contract. With the Nets, he'd be playing behind Kyrie Irving and James Harden. With the Cavs, he'd be playing behind Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. It's a similar situation. There's just not a clear path for Dinwiddie to get a lot of minutes. He really doesn't help the Cavs a whole hell of a lot. So I'm really not sure how interested they'd be by Dinwiddie. DeAndre Jordan, maybe, to back up Jared Allen. They could reunite in Cleveland. That would make sense. You could buy out JaVale McGee. And then Nick Claxton you can try to build up. But be honest, does that package really appeal to you? If you're the Cleveland Cavaliers, does a package of Dinwiddie, Jordan, and Claxton, and maybe a couple seconds really appeal to you? You gotta think that some team out there, like the Raptors, is gonna make a better offer. I think the only way the Nets can get Drummond is through the buyout market. And again, if that happens, I'd be doing backflips. Blake Griffin would be interesting. You could reunite him and Jordan. Lob City 2.0. But I'm not sure how well Griffin fits the Nets. The thing with Griffin is, we know he can score. And we know he can pass. The Nets have guys like that. Griffin's not good defensively. He's really not a good rebounder. Also, there's no way that you can work out a trade to get Griffin to the Nets. Dinwiddie, Jordan, and Claxton, it doesn't work. I've heard some people mention that Joe Harris could be moved in that type of a trade. No. You do not trade Joe Harris for Blake Griffin. That makes you no better. If anything, it makes you worse. Truthfully, I've never been a big Blake Griffin fan. I respect that he's a great dunker. Very good passer. Alright, underrated passer. But he makes the Nets no better. Everyone can agree on this. The Nets' biggest issues are defense and rebounding. Blake Griffin fills neither of those. If Griffin gets bought out, would I be upset if the Nets signed him? The answer is no. I mean, I'll tell you, a bench of Tyler Johnson, Landry Shamet, Bruce Brown, Blake Griffin, and Jeff Green sounds really good to me. If you want to throw TLC in there, you can. But again, I think he's useless. That can work. I have no problem with that. But to trade for him, no. That's not going to happen. JJ Redick is interesting. He's having a down year. But we know how talented he is. Excellent three-point shooter, veteran presence, 1,000,000 times better than TLC. If you added JJ Redick to this Nets team, the best offense in the league just got exponentially better. But again, let's think about this logically. Would Spencer Dinwiddie appeal to the Pelicans? Probably not. They have Lonzo, they have Kira Lewis, they have Eric Bledsoe, they have Josh Hart, they have Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I don't see how Dinwiddie fits on the Pelicans. Okay, what about DeAndre Jordan? The answer is yes. DeAndre Jordan would fit the Pelicans perfectly. Jackson Hayes has really underwhelmed with the Pelicans. I'm not saying he can't turn his career around. He's 20 years old, but the simple fact is what's holding the Pelicans back is their terrible bench. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's not bad. Not great, but not bad. Josh Hart's a dog when it comes to getting rebounds. I like that. But if that's all he brings to the table, you can do a lot better. Willie Hernan-Gomez isn't anything special. Kira Lewis seems to be taking a little more time than you'd like to develop. Nicolo Melli isn't anything special. And when you have guys like Zion, B.I., Lonzo, Eric Bledsoe, Steven Adams, and they're being coached by Stan Van Gundy, your window to win is now. I'm sure every Pelicans fan would agree with me when I say that the Pelicans really need to improve their bench if they want to make some noise. The last thing on earth you want is another Chris Paul, Anthony Davis situation. And don't kid yourself. If Zion doesn't win with the Pelicans sooner rather than later, he may get upset. It's happened twice with the Pelicans. It could happen for a third time. Now you may be asking yourself, how does Dinwiddie not fit the Pelicans if you're saying that they need to upgrade their bench? Again, Dinwiddie's going to need to sign a new contract. How would he feel about coming off the bench for the Pelicans? It's possible he could be talked into it because he'd be their third best offensive player, behind only Zion and B.I., but I do think Dinwiddie wants to start. I think he wants to play 30 minutes a game. So it's not impossible that the Pelicans could talk Dinwiddie into signing an extension with him, but I wouldn't bet the rent on it. So let's say it's a Redick for Jordan trade. Then you're losing all size. You're going incredibly small. And we saw that with the Rockets last year, that it doesn't work. You still need a big man who's capable of going up against the bigger guys in the league. Why do you think the Rockets had such a tough time with the Thunder, and why do you think they had such a tough time with the Lakers? It's because Steven Adams was snatching up every board, and LeBron and AD dominated with their size. It can't work. You still need a big guy to gobble up those rebounds and to make those bigger players work. Jordan does have a role on the Nets. As infuriating as he's been, he does have a role on the Nets. I like Jordan. I really do. The original third musketeer. So all in all, John Collins probably isn't going to happen. There's like a 99% chance that doesn't happen. Him going to the Nets. Andre Drummond would make perfect sense, but I don't know if the Nets have the package to make it work. I think it's more likely he goes to the Nets via the buyout market. And I would do backflips over that. Blake Griffin, the only way I'm doing that is through the buyout market. You can't trade for him. It doesn't work with the trade machine. Buyout market or bust. And JJ Redick, possible. Definitely possible. But the Nets do have bigger holes. Well, we give up 120 points a game. What are we going to do to fix that? We're going to score 125. That's what trading for Redick would do for the Nets. He doesn't really address any of their holes. And I will say, speaking of their holes, Steve Nash has done a terrible job addressing it. Yes, their defense was really good against the Warriors on Saturday. I get that. But I've got to see more of that. I mean, here's the thing. This zone defense and this constant switching, if it doesn't work, change the defense. If that's not what Jacques Vaughn wants to do, you're the head coach. You've got to realize what's happening, and you've got to make those changes yourself. You hear Nash talking about effort. Oh, we have to want to be good on defense. We've just got to put in the work. It's the same thing every time the Nets lose. That's what you hear. It's infuriating. I've got to cut Nash some slack because they played really well defensively against the Warriors on Saturday, but let's keep that up. I understand Kevin Durant being out is going to make that a lot harder. He will be out for at least the next 2 games because of a hamstring strain. I mean, you gotta think he's gonna push to come back on Thursday against the Lakers to go up against LeBron. And I'll say this, Durant was probably gonna miss one of these games anyway. The Nets have a back-to-back tonight and tomorrow. Tonight against the Kings, tomorrow against the Suns. Durant was probably going to miss one of those. So I can't get too bent out of shape about this. If it's really only 2 games, okay, fine. He should have never been out in the first place. The NBA is making up this COVID stuff as they go along. It's infuriating, but c'est la vie. If this really keeps him out for just 2 games, I can't go crazy over it. And there is one other thing I want to say. Kyrie Irving said to the media that he told James Harden he's the point guard. I'm the shooting guard. Isn't that exactly what I said on one of these earlier Nets shows? Didn't I say that would happen? It's so great to see Kyrie willing to do that. That's what people were nervous about. How would Kyrie respond to this? How's he going to deal with playing with James Harden? Harden has no pressure to score, and Kyrie has the pressure to score. He likes that. He likes to score. And Harden said that he was drained by being expected to go out and drop 30 every game with the Rockets. He doesn't have that pressure with the Nets. I mean, granted, with Durant out, he needs to step up. Whenever one of the big 3 is out, the other 2 need to pick up the slack, and that hasn't been happening. They're expecting guys like Harris and Brown and Green and Shamet and Jordan to step up. That's not going to work for me. I'd like to see Harden and Irving pick up more of that slack. Just because Harden's the point guard doesn't mean he can't score for himself. Some isolations, top of the key, step back 3, money. I'd like to see Harden be more aggressive, but I do like that he's the primary ball handler. And I love that Kyrie is on board with that. It wouldn't work without Kyrie being on board with it. Give him credit for that. New York Islanders show comes your way next week. Brooklyn Nets show comes your way the week after. Regular episodes of The Jacob Valk Show come your way every weekday afternoon. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying, you know what Philadelphians do when the game's rained out? They go to the airport and boo landings.